What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another episode of Wing and Tail Outdoors, where success is always just a commitment away. At the end of the last video, we talked about the next video being our fall planting process and kind of walking you all through that. Unfortunately, after that video posted, the rain really dried up in the forecast. We didn't think it was a good idea to go ahead and plant without guaranteed rain coming up. And it's a good thing we didn't, because like I said, it's been pretty dry for about a week, week and a half, 2 weeks now. So I think we made the right decision, and we still have a little bit of time before we need to panic. So nothing to worry about. In the meantime, what I wanted to do for you today is I wanted to give you an overview of what our property looks like and kind of give you some of the features of our property. That's going to include the way it's oriented, where our prevailing winds come from, some historical deer patterns that we've learned over the last few years, as well as some trail systems that exist, our access or lack thereof, some of the food plots that we've put in, and some of our stand locations and how we're gonna go ahead and use them this year. I have a pretty different way of showing this, I think. I have my trusty iPad here, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bounce back and forth between this video and screen recording to really give you a little bit of a better understanding or a more viewer-friendly way of seeing what it is that we're talking about. So thanks for joining us today, and let's get into it. First, let's get into the orientation of the property, where the prevailing winds come from, and some of those trails and those deer patterns. So in this photo, as you can see, I have north oriented to the top of the photo and everything else respectively speaking. Our prevailing winds come out of our northwest, which means our winds blow from northwest to southeast. And as you can see in this photo, that means that this wind is going to be blowing pretty much across our property. So that wind is coming essentially this way through the property. And that pretty much means the downside to that is anytime we want to access anywhere basically to the left of this line, then that essentially means that our wind or our scent is kind of getting blown across the entire property. So that's something that we need to take into consideration as we access our property and access our deer stands. Now, with access on the mind for a moment, I want to show you the access that we have, or the lack thereof. As you can see, very little of our property is roadside. So that means this red highlighted line here and this red highlighted stretch here is the only access that we have to our property from the road. Luckily, we have a neighbor down over here where I put that red X, who is we're fairly friendly with, and he allows us to access from his backyard, which really helps us out a lot. And then part of this red line here all the way to the left is the border between our property and the HOA property that we do have access to, and we have the ability to access our property from it. But the problem is that our boundary line is the far end of the HOA property, and it kind of doesn't pay to access there, especially with our neighbors, and we don't want to interrupt anybody else's hunting either. So as we move forward, access is 100% going to be something that we need to address. So now I'm going to switch over to blue, and I'm going to show you, generally speaking, some of the known trails that we have. So our main access trail comes from the right of that little rectangle there, the little rectangular section, and kind of comes to that back corner of the property there. That is the main trail that goes through our property. Off of that trail, we have one that kind of comes up the back here and comes around. But once you get to about here, you can't drive it anymore. You could walk it for sure, but you can't drive it anymore. There's a lot of washout and it's just not safe. So we try to avoid that. And then there's like another 2 trails that come out off of that one, but again, those both stop and you can't drive all the way through. Now off of that, there is another trail that kind of comes through here, and it touches the corner of this field here, but then also wraps around the back and comes to this field here. We're going to talk about those fields and what those red areas are in just a little bit. Outside of those few trails that we have there, we do not have a very good trail system on our property. So we're hoping to improve on that trail system as we move forward and allow that to help us access our property a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this. And lastly, I would like to talk to you about our known travel routes. And along with that, I'm going to talk about some of the topo features that we have here. The main ones, as you can see, are we have these big fingers that come out off of our neighbor's property and onto ours. So we have those two there. But then if you notice, we also have this low spot, I guess you could say, coming through here. And I'm going to highlight that in green. So we have that coming through there. And that's coming off of this finger, right? As that finger is coming down to the low ground. And then we have another one here as this finger comes down to low ground. And what that creates for us is somewhat of a natural travel route that these deer are traveling. And they either follow the bottom of the mountain there, or they come through this way. Sometimes they'll travel down and just go back up this way, which is fine by us. Now, this year what we've noticed is we have a lot of deer coming down this way, which again is perfectly fine by me. Unfortunately, they are coming from the neighbor's property, and they have, I guess, first access at those deer, if you would. But we have a lot of daytime photos on our property, so we're hoping that those deer are coming from our neighbor's property early in the morning, and they're on our property by the time daylight hits. So we're gonna have to assess that as we go. Lastly, I found a very heavy rub line. Not this past hunting season, but the one before that during rifle. And that essentially stretches the entire roadside, comes up above the water here, and just goes basically the entire stretch of the property. So with that in mind, we want to use that and kind of find a way to encourage those deer to come up into our property off of that main rub line, and also come down off the mountain to access our property and give us a better opportunity of harvesting a deer. So next, I want to talk about some of the qualities or features that our property does have. We talked about the trails, the deer patterns, we talked about the topo features, and now I want to kind of go into some of the attractions that we have. So first things first, I want to talk about an orchard that is on the property, and that is located, let's see, the orchard is located basically in this area here that I've just circled in green. And that orchard has been there for years now. We don't know exactly when, but it was planted by the family who owned the property before us. The property was in their family for about 100 years, give or take. And from what we understand, that orchard was planted at some point to supplement food for the family. Since they planted it, it wasn't pruned, it wasn't really kept up, and that orchard has pretty much expanded across our property. And it's not a whole property of an apple orchard, but there are apple trees kind of scattered throughout the entire property. And we do use those to our advantage. Next, I want to talk about the food plots. And this plot that you see here to the west is called the barber shop. And the barber shop got its name at the end of last season when our #1 hit list buck walked out into the field or just off the field, perfect shot, and it was just a miss. Whoever shot at him gave him a little haircut off his back, and right then and there is when that food plot got its name, the barber shop, and we're running with it. This plot is probably less than 1/10 of an acre, so it's very small, and this is a typical kill plot. Its only job is to attract deer off of their travel corridors or travel routes and bring them out into the field. Now, if you remember from a few minutes ago, there is a deer trail or travel route that comes through here. There's also a travel route that comes over the top kind of this way, where they could choose to go here or whatever the case may be. Having this kill plot here gives us an opportunity to pull those deer again off of those travel routes and give us an opportunity to harvest them, really, for lack of a better way to put it. We always plant a blend in this food plot. We have brassicas, legumes, broadleafs, grasses, so we have a little bit of everything. And this food plot held food last year through the first few frosts, and it had beautiful green up this year, so we're going to keep running with that. Now to the east side here, we have 3 food plots stacked one on top of the other. The top one, as I mentioned before, is called the orchard. Again, this food plot is most likely less than 1/10 of an acre. It is a smaller food plot. This area was cleared out from that apple orchard. There were some trees that were dead, not producing, on their way out, diseased. So we decided to cut them out, clear that area, and we made a nice spot for a food plot. This is also right on the edge of some thick stuff. We have some knotweed that grows here in between these 2 plots. And then we have this thick, like I mentioned, this thick orchard that is north of the food plot, but below it as far as the topo is concerned. And those deer come up off of that. If you remember me mentioning earlier, we had that deer travel corridor that kind of came through here. And this food plot does a very good job at pulling those deer up and attracting them up into the property. And then from there, they either travel back up the mountain or bounce through all the food plots before they exit and go back up the mountain. The middle food plot here, this is our cabin field. It has been in a few different videos now up to this point. And the reason why it's called the cabin field is because right here, practically where this line is, there used to stand a cabin. Last year, we cleared it out, which allowed us, or gave us the opportunity to have this second side of our cabin field. So this is the first side, the original side. We've been planting that for now 3 years. And this is our second side. And this fall planting will be the 3rd planting that we do on that second side. Together, what we call the old cabin and the new cabin area of that field comes to roughly 70% or 7/10 of an acre. So it's fairly large. It's the biggest area that we have. And the bottom half is growing really well. The top half is we're still working on it. We got a lot of compaction with the burying process. So we're just working through that and we're well on our way. Lastly, we have our power line field. And this is personally my favorite. It is longer, it is narrow, the deer feed through it rather than kind of just taking a step in, eating a little bit and then leaving. They do like to traverse it. If they come from the cabin field, then they eat through and they go back up the mountain. But if they come the other way, and let me illustrate this for you. If they come from the other side, if they come from our neighbor, it actually works out better in our benefit because they come down here or they come, along this ridge, however it is that they come, but then they eat their way through the field. And once they come through that field, they either come down below and circle back up, or they simply walk the trail that connects these 2 fields. And that gives us an opportunity to kind of hunt them in the middle there. Again, the power line is probably about 4/10 of an acre. So it's a decent sized kill plot. It's a little bit less than half, a little bit more than a quarter. So it's somewhere in that range. Again, we plant a full-fledged blend. It has a little bit of everything in this field. And this field gets essentially the most sunlight out of any field because it is open. It's open north to south, and it really gets quality sun throughout the entire day. Lastly, let's get into the resources that are available within a mile of our property here. On screen, I've made a grid, and the far right line, the far left line, the far top line, and the far bottom line are all 1 mile away from their respective sides. And that kind of gives us somewhat of a 1 mile perimeter around our property. First things first, let's talk about what those 3 main resources are. Deer need 3 things to survive and thrive. That is food, that is water, and that is bedding / cover / protection, basically. So first things first, let's circle all the fields that we have here, and then we could talk about them. So there's one field up this way, there's another one here, we got another one here, a couple over there, one here, and then 2 down in here. Let's start on the bottom side. So down here we have 2 fields that I know for sure are food plots. They're maintained, they're on one of our neighbors' properties and they're maintained. But from what we understand, these food plots are monocultures. which means they only plant one thing in these fields per growing season or per planting season, which can work, but it's also not as enticing to the deer, because what would you rather do? Would you rather have chicken every night, or would you rather have some chicken, some mashed potatoes, some corn, some gravy, so on and so forth, right? So while those food plots are there and they're essentially one of the main attractions during the hunting season in our area, we're hoping to change that with these food plots that we have going. Next, on the far right here, to be honest with you, I have no idea what this is. But looking at this map, there seems to be a road that cuts through it. So one of the things I want to do this year is I want to get in the vehicle. I want to drive some of these roads and see what some of these fields are. Are they simply hay fields? Are they just grass fields? Are they food plots? What's going on? Same thing up here. Not quite sure what this is. Again, I want to look into that and see what I can find out about that. However, this bigger one right here in the middle of your screen, this is nothing to worry about. This left side here, or I believe both sides of this, are hunted and managed by that neighbor that I told you has the property to the south of us. And that is simply leased out to a farmer or a cattle farmer who just uses that field for hay. So by the time the hunting season comes, that stuff is pretty much gone, and all it is an open field for the deer to hang out in at night or you know, as they're transitioning. We have two more fields here. The one on the top left, again, no idea what's going on there, and there is a road that goes through it, but from what I can tell, it looks like it's pretty hidden behind these trees. But I'm not opposed to taking a ride out there and seeing what we have to work with. Lastly, this one here is a farm, but not your typical farm. I drove past this a couple weeks ago, and they had some kind of grass, again, a monoculture growing, and the entire thing is fenced off. So do I think it's keeping deer out? No. Do I think as many deer are in there as would be if it wasn't fenced in? Again, no. I think there would be more. But also, remember, again, this is a monoculture. And as we all know, monocultures are not going to be as attractive to deer if they have the choice between a monoculture or a mixture. I personally truly believe, and research shows, that the deer are going to favor that mixture unless there's something in that monoculture that the mixture just doesn't offer, whether it be grains or grasses or broadleaves or brassicas, whatever the case may be. They're going to pick that mix over a monoculture just about every time. Now let's get into water. As you can see, water is not an issue anywhere around us. We have lakes, and you can't really see it on this map. There's a brook that runs through our property, which runs through here. You can't really see that, sorry. There's a brook that runs through our property, basically down through here. And then it comes out there, which is kind of cool, right? So we have that there. Then you have this body of water. You have this body of water. You have this body of water, and then you got some water over here, right? But that's not it. Remember, our entire property goes from uphill, downhill as we go from the back of our property towards the road. So what that creates is a whole lot of runoff throughout the entire mountain. Water is not an issue. What I will say though is, and we're going to talk about this in a future video, is I would like to put watering holes strategically placed near our food plots, so that way deer don't have to walk across the mountain to get water. But we're going to talk about that in a future video. Lastly, let's talk about cover and bedding areas. It's my understanding that most of the area that we're in was pasture about 100 years ago. And when those cattle farmers moved out and the land was purchased and bought up, and the forests were allowed to take over, they were pretty much allowed to take over however they wanted. And if the forest around our general area is anything like ours, we don't have a single oak tree. The oak trees have been decimated from our area. We have hard and soft maples. We have some ironwood. We have a lot of black cherry. We used to have a lot of ash, but it's all standing dead thanks to the emerald ash borer beetle. And we're going to try to take care of that. But our biggest issue is our American beech trees. They grow so quickly, they're so shade tolerant, and once they get a foothold, they could very easily take over a property. And what's happening is our middle story and our overstory are being taken over by these beech trees. So that is something that we're going to take care of as we move forward with our plan, and something we're going to talk about again in a future video. But what's happening is where the sun isn't able to reach the ground, or where it hasn't reached the ground in a while, we have a lack of cover. We don't have a lot of ground growth. We have very, very little understory growth. And we really need to address that if we want to create bedding. And if that is what the area around us is similar to, then bedding and food are the two most restricted resources for the deer right now. So those are going to be the two things that we want to focus on the most moving forward and give us the best chance of harvesting a deer during season. Ladies and gentlemen, that about wraps it up for today on another episode of Wing and Tail Outdoors. We got to cover some really exciting things today. We got to talk about our property and some of the features that it has, the orientation, the wind, how that wind affects us, some trail systems that we have, some deer travel routes, some food plots, some resources that are available in the area. If you like what you saw, go ahead and leave a comment, drop a like, subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment, tell us what you enjoyed, tell us something that you would like to see in a future video. The next video, depending on the weather, I'm hoping that it's going to be the fall planting. If not, then it's going to be the second half of this video where I get to talk to you about our 5-year plan and what we hope that our property looks like once we're kind of done doing our first level of TSI and food plot implementation and stuff like that. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on our next episode of Wing and Tail Outdoors, where success is always just a commitment away. Have a great day.